Hello, everyone, and welcome to Canadians with Disabilities and Their Allies. My name is Brent Frain. I'm the host, and the show is also known as PWD Allies Podcast. Check it out on Spotify or your app store, wherever you find it best suited for you. Today, I'm excited to have a great person from Guelph, Ontario, MPP Mike Schreiner. Welcome to the show. This is awesome to have you on. And
Hey, Brent.
Mike is the green. He's the green MPP for Guelph, Ontario.
Hey, Brent. It's a pleasure to join you, and I'm really looking forward to this conversation.
Yeah, it's a great pleasure to have you join on, and you're actually the first MPP from Ontario that we've actually had on our show. So this is a wonderful episode.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah,
Yeah,
double
and
honor.
yeah,
Yeah,
thank you. And I'm
we
going to direct the conversation over to Dan Trays. Dan is actually in Toronto, Ontario, lived experience. And so, with that being said, I'm going to pass it over to Dan. Thanks, Dan, for joining with us on this great conversation.
And no, thanks to you guys, and thanks to Mike for joining us here today. I'm very familiar with your work. I have a sister Sarah who trains out of the Genesis stables up near your guys' area and works and plays. She's a constituent and a supporter, so I know a lot about your work and such. But I was just wondering if you could just tell us off the hop, the next couple of years, an election coming up. What does the Green Party and yourself want to say to potential voters as well as possibly Green Party candidates going into the next 2 years and what you can do for PWDs as the Green Party leader?
Yeah, Dan, I really appreciate you asking, and tell your sister hi for me, and happy to chat anytime. I think there are really two critical issues. So the first is we have to more than double Ontario disability support payments so people with disabilities no longer live in legislated poverty. And I've been meeting with some disability advocates who are saying that at the very least, the housing allowance on ODSP should be the equivalent of the average market rent across the province. To say that people with disabilities, somehow live on $1,300 a month when, the average one bedroom apartment in most larger cities, at least, is well over $2,000 now, is
Mhm.
just, it's criminal. It's wrong. It's immoral. And it's hurting people and communities. And so, I led the charge in the last provincial election, calling on the government to double ODSP rates. And it was great to see the NDP joined in that call as well. And we did get the Ford government to raise rates by 5% and peg them to inflation, but that is still woefully inadequate. And so
Mhm.
we're going to continue to keep pushing on that issue. Also, just had a meeting this morning actually with a constituent that really gets to my next issue is the AODA, deadline for Ontario to be in compliance is 2025. That's a year, less than a year away now. We're not even close. We're not even
Mhm.
close as a province. And so really pushing hard to, I guess, one, have government acknowledge we're not going to meet that commitment, but then up with a plan of how we are going to meet that commitment. Because everybody in the province of Ontario should be able to deserves to have the opportunity to participate in all aspects of public and private life. And when you don't meet accessibility standards, and you're not going to do that, and I'm especially concerned around accessibility standards for housing. We are in a housing crisis. We need to build homes that people can afford in the communities they know and love. And we have to make sure those houses that we built meet universal accessibility design standards. And so we need to,
Mhm.
improve the building code, to mandate that in the building code as we address this housing crisis. We can't then create another crisis, that being that people with disabilities can't access those homes. Mhm.
Mhm. Mhm.
And if I may, just as a quick follow up there, Mike, I personally have met you a couple of times. I think the last time was 2 years ago at a housing rally down at Queens Park. What suggestions do you have for those PWD who maybe can't afford or aren't able to make it down there to these rallies, what do you suggest they do as the best course of action to participate in all that's going on in the province?
Dan, that's a great question because I sometimes, I've participated in a lot of rallies at Queen's Park, and the rallies to support people with disabilities oftentimes attract a lot of people, but sometimes they're not as large as some of the other rallies. And it's because not everyone can attend. And so what else, what other things can we do? Well, the constituent who came in today, I said to that person, like, I have done news conferences in the media studio at Queen's Park in the past with disability advocates. And I was like, let's get you down. Like, won't have to be a rally, but let's get you into the building, into the media studio, and tell your story and talk about why it is so important that housing be accessible for people. I think there's lots of opportunities for people to speak out through, petitions, letter writing campaigns, phone calls. I do Zoom events with people with disabilities to get the message out and to engage people who don't have a disability to be allies and advocates, and also to tell people, you know what? Most of us, almost everyone will eventually have a disability as we age. And so even if you don't think issues related to people with disabilities affect you right now, it's likely going to affect you sometime in the future. And so I think every single person in Ontario has a public obligation to be allies and advocates for people with disabilities, but also likely will be a person with disabilities sometime in the future. So you have a public and a personal reason that you should be speaking out and advocating on these issues.
You just stole. I just had to come in because you just stole Brent's line all the time. That's what Brent says all the time. Is
I do.
At some point, Brent will always say, at some point, you're all going to get a disability. So
I say this all the time on every single podcast, Mike. I say that you're either born with a disability, you're going to develop a disability at any point in time in your life, and then as we get older, you're going to get other complex disabilities added on top of your disabilities. Yeah, so yeah, you took the line, and that's great. It's so important to get the message out there that just because a person may not have a disability, an ally, someone, maybe a family member or someone that they know, if it's a doctor or it's an MP or MPP or an MLA or any person, doesn't matter who they are, they can still get disabilities, but they can still know people with disabilities. And as we all are going to get a disability one form or another. I mean, it may not be visible. So thank you for saying.
And I was going to say too, another way to get the message out is to appear on a podcast.
Exactly.
There you go. Join Neil and Brent and have Dan tag on, eh?
There you go.
Yeah.
I didn't know if you wanted to talk briefly, Brent, about kind of what's happened here in BC and do a comparison contrast a little bit.
I will, yeah.
Because, just the other day, our minister here, Sheila Malcolmson, was in a conference on a Zoom call with another advocate. And the advocate asked her, what's going to happen with the Canada Disability Benefit? Does the province promise to not claw back the Canada Disability Benefit when it's eventually released at some point? And the minister said, we cannot commit at this time. We cannot commit to no clawbacks.
Right.
Yeah. And that to me is a really bad sign, because like if there's one thing you know about me, if you watch any of the previous podcasts, I'm a big guy on the pink unicorn, right? And this idea that government can turn like pensions that are guaranteed protected. It's supposed to be a protected income. Pensions are a guaranteed protected income. And the idea that you can turn a guaranteed protected income into a pink unicorn and say, oh, that doesn't matter, we'll just get rid of that one, even though we can call it a targeted wraparound support income, right? That's a targeted wraparound support income, which again, government loves to use those terms. So they'll say something is a targeted wraparound support, but then they'll totally invalidate a pension and claw it back. And so that to me is scary when the minister says we're not going to commit to no clawbacks. Anyway, I just wanted to get your feedback on that.
Sure. Yeah. So from what I'm understanding is that the minister that's in British Columbia, it has the portfolio for the Ministry of Social Development and Poverty Reduction. Miss Malcolmson, MLA Miss Malcolmson. I'll rephrase that. Honorable. Yeah. Honorable Malcolmson has a portfolio, and what she's doing right now is she's waiting on the federal government to decide if how the Canada Disability Benefit, when it may possibly come to fruition. Who knows when that will be? So the regulations have until June to get it into force of June of 2024. They have a year after that to actually get the finance part out. So it'll be June of 2025. So I'm not really understanding, or I'm not sure why the minister would want to wait and see, because in reality, that's over a year from now before any finance may come to possibly to people with disabilities. Now, but here's the thing, Neil and Mike and Dan, is the unknown is who is it going to go to, right? Nobody knows if it's going to go just to people with the disability tax credit. Is it going to go to all people on provincial disabilities across Canada and the territories? So all the unknown part is waiting and delaying. People's lives don't get put on hold. Poverty doesn't just get put on hold. It just escalates more. So to me, that's not really a poverty reduction. That's like a poverty escalation, because cost of living keeps going higher. Rents keep going higher. And so I think it's just I think it's a delay tactic. Personally, that's what I think. I mean, hopefully prove me wrong. Because also while I'm quickly on that topic, then I'm going to pass it over to Mike, and maybe we'll dive into about homelessness too here. There was nothing in the BC budget for persons with disabilities in BC, which is really, it's very sad. I mean, we have a $9 billion deficit, but there was nothing in there to show for an increase. Again, I think that's, for persons with disabilities and people on income assistance. Cost of living, again, it's high. People get rent increase notices. I got one, and my landlord says, well, why was there nothing in the budget? I go, I don't know. I think they're just waiting on the feds. So that could be like a year and a half from now. And I just want to throw that part in, and maybe you'll get Mike's your view on that, like people on income assistance in Ontario and ODSP. I guess, what do you think may be coming up in the budget for your province? What do you think might be happening there?
Yeah, well, Brent, first of all, I just want to say how deeply disturbing it is, the conversation you're talking about out of BC, because I would think that the BC government, of all the provincial governments, would be the most progressive when it comes to income assistance and just supporting people with disabilities. And so hearing that BC cannot commit to not clawing back the Canadian Disability Benefit really scares me, because, we have Doug Ford here in Ontario, and I'm really worried the Ford government is going to claw back ODSP, which is woefully inadequate because of the Canadian Disability Benefit, and I just think that's wrong. It's immoral, and the other part of this that I want to say to folks is that, at least in Ontario, and I'm assuming this would apply in every province in the country, that poverty costs Ontario $33 billion a year. Additional healthcare costs, policing, fire, paramedics, stress on our social service systems, lost productivity, the list goes on and on. It would be far cheaper to actually eliminate poverty than it would be to pay the cost of $33 billion. So not only would you improve people's lives in a real and substantial way, but it would actually save society money, and I think just make our communities better places to live. And so, the thought that the Canadian Disability Benefit would be clawed back just moves us in the wrong direction. And I just want to quickly give a shout out to Mike Morris, the MP for Kitchener Center, and
he's great.
a good friend of mine.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's been so great on the Canadian Disability Benefit. And I know he moved a number of amendments at committee to improve it, but he told me after he did that, he was like, Mike, I'm excited about what we've accomplished, but I'm still just so angry and frustrated that there has been no money announced in a budget to actually fund the Canadian Disability Benefit. So here's so many people with disabilities. I'm like, oh, this is passed. This is great news. When am I going to get my money? No money's allocated for it. And now you have provincial governments not committing to not clawing back is really tragic.
Well, especially with the federal budget coming out on April 16th of this year. And I think a lot of governments right now are waiting to see what's going to happen on that federal budget. Well, I think it's going to be very disappointing. I think it's going to be like one step forward and then one step back of saying, well, look what we're doing, but we've got to wait and see. There'll be some kind of a delay tactic. I mean, people's lives, like, they don't get put on hold due to government, choosing not to actually take care of their citizens. And I guess I always say this on my podcasts, and Mike and I'll say it again, is that if you give people the resources, the money and the resources, it's going to better their health, their well-being. They're going to put the money back into the economy that they live in. Maybe they'll go to another community and they'll help out their economy, support small businesses, and everybody thrives. Like, it just, money goes around, and with not providing that, it really hurts the economy and the person's well-being too.
Totally. And, I don't want to raise a sad, tragic subject, but I think we have to, I have people who I greatly, greatly admire who have a disability, who are strong disability advocates. One person in particular who's applied for MAID and medical assistance in dying, for those of you who don't know the acronyms. And it breaks my heart. Like, it just, what kind of country, what kind of society are we that there are people with disabilities applying for MAID, not because they don't want to live, but they just can't continue to live in extreme poverty and live in a society that devalues them to such an extent that they would be forced to live in legislated poverty. And I know we as Canadians are better than this. Like, I know Canadians are caring people, and I just don't think we can allow this to stand. We cannot let governments get away with this. And, that's why I'm going to continue to ask about the Ontario budget, which is coming out on March 26th. Brent, Neil, and Dan, I don't hold out a lot of hope for the Ontario budget, if I'm going to be totally honest with you. But I'm going to continue to hope and to push that this government brings ODSP and Ontario Works, because let's face it, a lot of people on Ontario Works actually should be on ODSP, but because of all the barriers to being on ODSP,
all the red tape,
Ontario Works, which is $731 a month in Ontario, like, that's just completely impossible to survive on for anyone. Those rates need to be brought up at least to the low income cutoff level, so nobody lives in legislated poverty. And if there was a big wish that I could put out there for the Ontario budget, in a couple of weeks, would be that we actually end legislative poverty in this province.
Right now, the federal level for they call it the poverty level. Of course, it's just like a mark in the sand, shall we say. But as I remember back at the beginning of the pandemic, there are persons who, not saying, have a disability, but just the national level that the Mr. Trudeau had said at the beginning of the pandemic was $2,000, and that was for CERB, right? And so now with that amount going forward, it's 2104, and that's based at last year's model, and that was the market basket measure. It's those rates are woefully way below across Canada. I mean, even the ones in the Maritimes and the Atlantic provinces, wow, their rates are even lower. I mean, speaking for British Columbia, like, we're the most expensive province in Canada. I mean, and the last stats that I was reading is that Ontario is right behind, literally right behind BC for the market rents. I know in BC, like, you're looking at $2,100 for a one bedroom. I mean, that's if you can find it for that price. Some of them are going for 2-bedroom for that price in older buildings, but yeah, it's crazy. The rates are just so far below what they should be for standard. And I want to give a shout out to the Green Party in BC. They're really strong advocates. They're really pushing the provincial government about raising the rates up to a standard level. Right now, they're actually debating Bill 7 in British Columbia, Mike, and redoing the legislation for social development and poverty reduction and income assistance levels. They're trying to modernize it. Well, they're tinkering around with all the legislation, all the wording, taking stuff out of here, putting stuff into there. They're easing restrictions for people on assistance. They call it income assistance in British Columbia.
Which is just rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic, though, like I said, because, like, they're not injecting any more money.
No,
if you're not going to be injecting any more money into the system, if the money's the same, all you're doing is just shuffling things around and saying, look what we did.
But here's the scary plan.
But there's no more money, so it's the same program.
But the scary part on it is that if a person opts into, they're making it easier, but if a person opts into, it says the minister at any time can cancel, they can suspend, cancel that plan. So if you opt into it and you say, I physically or mentally, I can't do that, or I thought I could, I can't, they could cancel that. So if you were opted into it, that's the scary unknown part. And I think the opposition parties are right now really looking into that, saying, what are you doing? Like, why not just put a basic income out there already?
Exactly.
or double the rates and just be done, let people live their lives, all that bureaucracy, red tape. It's when I heard they were going to be modernizing and redoing the whole legislation, well, no, they're not. They're just tinkering around with that.
We have a couple of really strong Greens in our provincial government too. Sonia Firstino and Adam Olson, and they've been really good, because when they stood up and were debating the Bill 7, one of the things that they said is they went back to the when they had that pilot project, or they were talking about rolling out a
basic income.
Basic income. Sorry, my brain again.
It's okay.
Basic income, and both of them are saying, like, we're only expecting a basic income for people with disabilities, or women trying to escape violence, or children aging out of care. Those are the three areas where a basic income would be really beneficial. And if you're only targeting three main areas of people with disabilities, or women trying to escape violence, or children aging out of care, that shouldn't be a big ask. And yet the BC government's pushed back and say, oh, we can't do that.
Well, here that's a good segue into the homeless part too, because if people they can't afford their housing, right, or they're fleeing violence, and women are fleeing violence, and today actually that's a good comment too.
Yeah, I'm glad we actually mentioned that.
International Day of Women's Day, so that's a good segue into that, and but also people are kind of very living a very precarious housing. In some cases, they're fleeing violence, like they're stuck in a home where if their spouse or someone that they live with causes them bodily harm for whatever reason, or maybe that's just one example. I mean, I'm not pointing it out on any specific person, but I mean, in some cases, I've heard some really terrible stories, sad stories. I've heard stories where apartment buildings have burnt down, or if the building's been sold or condemned. Person tries to find market housing in another community. Now the rates are not, they're not tied to the person. So when they move, now that rent goes right up. Now where are they going to find affordable housing? They're not. They're going to be on the streets. So that's where I'm going to pass it over to you, Mike. We'll kind of get right into homelessness.
Yeah, I mean, I think the only way we're going to address the ballooning homelessness crisis that we're seeing across the country with so many more people experiencing homelessness is for the provincial and federal governments to get back into the business of building deeply affordable nonprofit, co-op, social, permanent supportive housing. First the Chrétien Liberals federally, and then in the case of Ontario would have been the Harris Conservatives cut those programs in the mid 90s.
Wow.
Prior to that time, as many as 20,000 housing starts in Canada were deeply affordable nonprofit co-op social supportive housing. And we simply haven't been building that kind of housing now for 3 decades. And the crisis just keeps getting worse and worse and worse. Now we've reached the breaking point. And I don't know what the stats are for other provinces, but in Ontario, 93% of the deeply affordable homes in this province were built before 1995. So that just shows you that we are not going to solve this problem through market housing. And I say that as an advocate. I have a bill in front of the legislature right now to legalize housing, to make it as of right to be able to build fourplexes and 4-story in all neighborhoods in Ontario, 6 to 11-story along major transit and transportation corridors. So I want to say that by saying we need to have more market supply too. But even if you have all that market supply, we will not have the deeply affordable homes that so many people in our communities desperately need. I mean, according to Scotiabank, not some radical left-wing organization, in Ontario alone, we need to build 250,000 deeply affordable homes over the next decade. And so I'm going to be continuing to push for that. It's a part of the Ontario Greens housing plan. And we really need to have all 3 levels of government, municipal, provincial, and federal, aligned on the fact that we're going to have government assisted housing built if we're going to have any hope of addressing the needs of people who are experiencing homelessness.
One thing that I had really pushed the provincial government on here with an idea about RGI for PWD in the market housing, because right now they have in BC, it might be the same in Ontario, but it is called a different wording for the type of housing. But they in BC they have it called BC housing, and then there's an umbrella where now you've got seniors who live in other subsidized housing or co-op housing. They can actually live in their own homes. They don't even have to move anywhere. They can just get a supplement, but they can still have that same criteria of under the BC housing umbrella, where they can still get that same subsidy. So what I've recommended to the government is for PWD who don't live in subsidized housing or co-op housing, et cetera, they can still live in their own homes, or they can move to maybe a newer home, wherever they want to live in the province of BC, but they can still, they say, live in their own home where they want to live, but still have that connection of through the BC Housing Hub on that, where they can pay RGI housing, have RGI housing, but it needs to be geared to the person, not the household. See, right now under legislation, they have everything set on household, which now can actually impact that person big time. So if they want to go, just for instance, Mike, if they first person wanted to go to a recreation center, maybe to better their well-being, their health, and get fit, use the fitness equipment, they can't do that if it's based on a household. If you got, say, 2 PWD in a household, they're going to base it on your household income. Now that if your household income is too high, you don't qualify. So that's the problem.
You know what I call that is the government telling you who you can love.
Yeah.
Live with.
Yeah.
It's just disgusting.
But I wanted to turn it over to Dan as well, because Dan, you have an RGI apartment, right? And you have the lived experience of being homeless and all that. So I just wanted to let you have a word in about the RGIs and how it's benefited you and your experience with homelessness.
And speaking of which, the capital projects are going on. So if you hear drilling, I apologize. But yeah, no, I live in a TCHD building, which goes into what I was going to say to Mike, is that I live right at Eglinton West Station. So anytime you need somebody at a presser, just give me a call.
Okay, sounds good.
Yeah, the RGI units, as I can see, we're low on time there. So the RGI units, I finally got housed in 2016. So one thing that I want to share with everybody too is that we didn't share this with Mike before this show. So this is raw. I was homeless 19 years, from 97 to 2016. And in that time period, guess who my employer was? Mr. Doug Ford. I worked at Deco Labels and yes, sir. I was a silkscreen finisher. So my point to this story is after all these years and all these times and the experiences I've had also being an AA for 5 years at Toronto City Council, I'm wondering how this gentleman, like, what's it going to take to get him over the edge and realize that, man, people are dying on our streets and they need your help, sir. They need his help. And all I see is your party, which I want to congratulate Ashlyn. I believe it was yesterday or the day before when she stood up with the other MPPs with regards to International Women's Day. I'm very friendly with Mary Margaret McMahon, Kristen, even Merritt I met the other day in my neighborhood. I just wanted to say thank you for what you do. And yeah, with RGI units, it's a necessity because it's like you said, I think we've gone too far now. I became homeless in the days that Mike Harris did all those cuts, so I know what it's like. And we got to come out with different aspects of how to change things because we all have a different story, right? All I needed is a roof over my head to have that beginning, but so many other people need so many other services. So again, after that winded message, I thank you and your staff for joining us here today. And yeah, I'm a phone call away, brother.
Sounds good, Dan. Could I just, for Neil and Brent, can I just explain what Dan was referring to regarding International Women's Day? So
absolutely.
Those of us who don't have official party status in the legislature, when a minister gives a statement, we have to ask for unanimous consent to be able to respond to it. So we had asked for unanimous consent for the women members of our parties to be able to speak on International Women's Day, and the Conservative government turned it down. Believe it or not. Said no to women speaking on International Women's Day. So Ashlyn and Mary Margaret McMahon and a number of other women MPPs held a news conference just demanding that they be heard. And finally, the government, under pressure, backtracked and allowed those independent members to speak in the House on International Women's Day. And so, Dan, I just, thank you for noticing that and speaking out on it.
It's so important that everyone should have the chance to speak up on how they feel, and especially on International Women's Day. I mean, women have the right to feel welcome within their parliamentary, their home. I mean, that's like their home that they go to every day. And if they feel that they've been silenced out, that's just wrong. So I think people should be able to speak up and say how they feel. I mean, that's democracy, right? I mean, and being civil, but being able to speak up and actually say because I how they feel. Because I mean, I've witnessed and I've heard what's going on, and so many things need to change. I think within legislation for sure, but. We all learn and from each other.
The unicorn behind your head is smirking now, Brent.
Smirking. There's a unicorn behind me. You notice that? I have it there on each show. It just reminds of these false policies that are sitting there that kind of mimics what people can and cannot do in life in the government, and they need to change because I think equality. People should have autonomy, should be able to make decisions for themselves of what they need to do in life, what betters their well-being, their financial well-being. It doesn't matter what it is. Transportation, there's so many topics that I love to dive into, Mike. I'll have to have you back on and we can dive into.
We need another half hour.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Well, I'm happy to come back anytime, and I really appreciate the invitation, and really glad that Dan could join us today as well.
Yeah, it's great having both of you join us together on this. This is great, and diving into the important things that affect people's lives, like the income assistance and disability rates in Ontario and homelessness. And it doesn't just stop in Ontario; it goes across the whole country. And but focusing on that is so important of seeing where things are at. And I find that a lot of provinces will kind of copy, say, hey, what is that jurisdiction doing? and we'll do that too. And it doesn't always work, the copy and paste. Yeah. But definitely we can better people's lives by listening to lived experience and listening to allies and going from there and working together and making it a better country and for all, for sure. I want to thank you very much, Mike and Dan, for joining us today, and for our viewers that will be tuning in and commenting. And basically, with that being said, I'm going to pass the mic over to Neil because he's got a little announcement to make.
Yeah, just quickly before we go, I'm going to try a first thing that I've never done before. We're going to actually, this is a pre-recorded segment, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to release it again at it'll be 1 p.m. Pacific or 4 p.m. Eastern, and we're going to have it release as a premiere event, and it'll have live chat at that point. So even though this is a pre-recorded thing, we're going to play it back as a premiere event on YouTube so people can actually watch. It'll be like a watch party, and everybody can comment in the chat as they're watching it. So
so I get to host it twice then.
You get to host it twice, and same with Dan. Yeah. Dan can show up twice. Dan can show up twice, and even if Mike wants to show up, he can show up at 4 p.m. and comment.
Yeah, there you go. That's another invitation for you if you're up, but if you're not, then that's fine. But yeah,
I appreciate that.
You might have a couple things to do.
Maybe just a few things. Yeah. Anyway, thanks for tuning in, everyone.
Yeah. Thanks, everyone.
It was a lot of fun. Thank you. I appreciate your work.
Okay.
Thank you, Mike.
Bye now.